Hi, Room 21 Rockstars. Welcome to our science test review. Sorry for bringing the review to you one day late, but I have a ton of material that I really believe is going to help you to study really well for our assessment, which is tomorrow, remember. So, if you have your Science Interactive notebook right now, and the study sheets I gave you on the way out the door on Friday, and any other notes, anything that you may have, maybe some blank paper, pencil, marker, pizza box, anything that you can practice your studying on, that would be excellent. So we're really going to start in order of how we learned it in class, starting with Earth, Earth's layers, plate tectonics, and then rocks and the rock cycle and things like that. So my first question to all of you is, how old is planet Earth? Approximately, how old do scientists believe planet Earth is? Think about it for a second, and then I'm going to reveal it in one quick second. Okay, how old is Earth? That is right, 4.6 billion years old is how old most scientists believe Earth actually is. Think about what we talked about. How do scientists know that Earth is about 4.6 billion years old? What evidence do they have? What are the things that they use to say, hey, Earth is this old? Because that's really old, 4.6 billion years. Think about the fossil evidence and all of those great things that we talked about in class, which contribute to the age of the Earth. So, planet Earth, 4.6 billion years old. Next thing I want to talk about, guys, is the layers of the Earth. Okay, you know the song. I have a link on our Class Fusion page to the song that I played over and over in class. And on Friday, I gave you this diagram, which was just Journey to the Center of the Earth. I gave you this so that you can just practice labeling Earth and some of the characteristics that make up Earth. Now, I completed mine, and as you can see, I have each of the four labels, the layers labeled, and I put characteristics of each. So, if you want to pause the video right now to compare your sheet, let me just make sure, guys, that this is perfect for you. Right now, I would pause the video and just compare your sheet to what I have on my sheet. The four layers. What is each layer made up of? What are some of the characteristics of each layer? So this would be a good point to pause to kind of practice the four layers of the Earth. You can also practice a song and all of those great things. Okay, so now let's move on to a little bit of plate tectonics, and this is where you're going to need something to draw on. Okay, and what I would do is I would divide a piece of paper, I'm doing it right now, I'll show you mine, into thirds. Okay, have my marker in hand, paper into thirds. Okay, we have three type of plate boundaries. One of the plate boundaries, and what you can actually do right now is draw them if you'd like. Just use arrows. I'm doing the same thing right now. Okay, so here's my diagram of the three plate boundaries. Okay, so over here we have one where the plates slide against each other. In the middle, we have a plate boundary where the plates are going away from each other. And over here we have, remember, you can have two different types here where the plates are hitting each other, running into each other, converging upon each other, or where one is slipping down over the other. And if you just pause 1 second, let me go get an orange, and I'll be right back. Okay, guys, if you remember in class, way back before Thanksgiving break, or maybe not before Thanksgiving break, but anyhow, we took the orange, and I said, just peel it. Try to peel it into larger sheets or it's going to be harder for you. So we peeled it, and then I said, okay, I have toothpicks, put this back together. And what you guys realized was there were gaps that didn't fit together anymore. There were areas, it was just really hard to put together. And what the orange peel represented was the layers of the plate tectonics of the Earth. They're not perfect. They're always moving. There are gaps. There are parts that are overlapping. And that's what we have right here. So make sure you draw these 3 plate boundaries. Okay. The next step I would say that you want to look at is actually labeling them. Okay, so go ahead and label them. I'm going to label mine, and then you compare your work to my work. Okay, guys, here's what I have. Okay, so the plates that actually run against each other, another name for them would be strike-slip, a strike-slip boundary. These are transform. That's a transform plate, transform boundary. Here is a divergent boundary. They diverge. Okay, exactly what the word means. And here's a convergent boundary where the plates actually come together. Okay, and now what I actually want you to do is, on the bottom, write some real-life examples of each of these plates on planet Earth. What are some things that they create? What are some geological features that they create? So let me write down that word, geological features, so that you can see that. Okay, so here's the word geological features. Write down right below just some things that each of these create. Some geological features. Go ahead and do that right now. Alrighty, rock stars. So check out my geological features. Okay, the convergent plates, real life, have formed the Rocky Mountains and the Himalaya Mountains over in Asia. The divergent plate has formed the largest mountain range in the world, which is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is totally underwater. Okay, that's in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And the transform boundary would be, an example of that would be the San Andreas Fault, and that's where you get a lot of earthquakes around the Ring of Fire. Now, I really quickly want you to think about which plate, where would you find new crust being formed on the Earth? Which of these boundaries would you find new crust being formed? Think about that for a second. Exactly, the divergent boundary, because if you think about when we actually did the edible experiment with the graham cracker and pudding, when you pulled it apart, the pudding came up, okay, and it created that ridge. Well, that's where you would find new crust, because the crust is literally sliding apart and the magma comes up and forms new crust. Okay, so we have convergent, divergent, and transform. And some examples of real-life geological features would include the Rocky Mountains and Himalayas for convergent boundaries, the Mid-Atlantic Ridge for a divergent boundary, and the San Andreas Fault for a transform boundary. Okay, now, my other question for you is, these are all boundaries because that's where two plates come together, right? Another word you just want to keep in mind would be fault. That's where the two plates are coming together. Think about our orange and all the pieces that you had to put back together. All of those cracks were the faults. Okay, so think about the orange, plate tectonics. Think about convergent, divergent, and transform boundaries. Think about some real-life examples of all of these. And there's one last thing I want you to think about, and that would actually be, why are the plates constantly moving? We've talked about that a lot in class, but why are the plates? There are 7 major plates on Earth. Why are they constantly moving? So I want you to get another sheet of paper, and I'm going to draw kind of a triangle. It's a cross-section of Earth's layers. Okay. So here's what I have right now. Go ahead and draw something like that. Kind of looks like a piece of pizza. Pretend that I just took this chunk out of the Earth. So this very center here is actually considered the inner core. And then we have the outer core. And then we have the mantle. And then we have the crust. Okay, so the big question is, why are the plate tectonics up there on the crust moving? Well, in order to understand that, you best think about what we just talked about. What is each layer composed of? So the inner core is just solid iron and nickel. Okay, and then the outer core is a melted iron and nickel. Now the mantle, that's where it comes in. That is full of hot, juicy magma that is just moving. And we know that it's so hot, and anything that's hot is going to move. Okay, so a couple of key words that we've talked about would include thermal energy. That just means that energy under the earth from heat. Okay, thermal heat. And the magma inside of the mantle is churning. Okay, remember that word we talked about? So it's actually churning like that, and those are called, that churning magma. Think about that video I showed you that had such an amazing example of this. Those are called convection currents. Let me write those down and look at that word. Say it a couple times so that you make sure you have that down. Okay, so the thermal energy in the mantle is making that magma just churn in circles, and those are called convection currents. Well, if you think about it, if all this magma in the mantle is just going in circles, whatever's on top of it is kind of going to be floating. So the crust is literally floating on the mantle, which is churning, and that creates some movement up here with the plates. These convection currents cause the plates to be constantly moving, and that's why we have these three boundaries, and that's why we have volcanoes and earthquakes and all of that good stuff. Okay, so once again, think about it. Why do the plates move? Well, the convection currents in the mantle are constantly churning from the thermal energy, the energy produced by heat. Okay, so that magma is just going in circles, and basically the plates and the crust are floating on top of that. And then when there's a crack, the magma in the mantle goes up and becomes lava as it creates a volcano. Okay, so really quickly as well, think about the difference between magma versus lava. Okay, two big differences. We've been talking about it for a while now. Magma is when it's in the mantle. It's when it's under the earth. So think magma, mantle. Okay, lava is when it comes out of the ground through a volcano or some other source and cools and hardens. Okay, so magma is under the earth in the mantle. Lava is when it actually cools and hardens and comes out of the earth. Okay, so we have plate tectonics. We have real-life geological features. We have why do the plates move? This diagram explains it. Make sure you have that vocabulary down there. If you remember the quiz, guys, before, I think it was actually before Thanksgiving break, a lot of you kind of kept out some of that key vocabulary, so I'm going to be really looking for that on this next assessment if you have to explain that again in sentences, okay? So that you sound like a real-life scientist, okay? Think of orange for plate tectonics and all of those great things. Now we're going to switch over to rocks, the rock cycle, and all of that good stuff. So I guess my first question to each and every one of you is, what is a rock? Think about the key vocabulary, okay? Maybe just take a sheet of paper and write down anything that comes to mind when you think of what is a rock. I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, guys, so here's what I have. What is a rock? Number one, I think of a rock as a solid. Okay, it's a solid. Number two, I know that every single rock is made from some form of sediment at one point or another. And number three, I know the rocks are made naturally. We cannot create rocks. They're made through natural processes over thousands of years. So, what is a rock? It's a solid, it's made of sediments, and it's formed naturally. Okay, so very important. Okay, let's move on to some properties of rocks. If you remember, and if you went into the masterminds, that might still be a good thing to go on to right now on Brain Pop, when you tested all of the rocks. You tested each of the rocks and had to take them to the lab and went to all of these different stations, and you tested the color and the streak and the hardness and all of those different things. Those are the properties of rocks, things that make up the rocks, things that, the characteristics of the rocks, I guess would be a good synonym. So all I want you to do right now is think about all of the properties with which scientists can measure and identify rocks. Okay, so let me write down the word properties. How do scientists find out, identify, classify rocks? Well, they classify them through the properties. Now I just want you to list all of the different properties that come to mind. Maybe when you were playing Masterminds, or just when we were in class. I know in your science notebook we have a page that describes each of the properties, okay? One of the ones that comes to mind very quickly for me would just be color. If you think about Masterminds, when you went in there, you were actually, you had to turn that wheel to match it to the perfect color. Okay, and then that takes me to luster. What is luster, guys? Think about my watch, and I don't have it on right now, but remember I would hold it up into the light. So luster is, how does the light reflect from the rock? Okay. Another one would be the streak. Because if you think about it, you took that streak plate and you took the rock and you scraped it up against, and you looked at the color that the streak left. Okay, and I can think specifically, I think of graphite. Somebody had graphite in the masterminds, and it made that really dark streak because that's what's in your pencil. Okay, so streak, luster, color. Color is very straightforward. Luster, how does the light reflect from the rock? Streak, you take that streak plate, what color does it make? Another one would be hardness. We had Mohs hardness scale, if you remember. Let me write that down for you. And if you remember, you had all of those tools at your table. You had a nail, you had glass, you had all of those different things that we were trying to figure out the hardness of the mineral, right? So the hardness, Mohs hardness scale is what you use, and it's from 1 to 10. Can you guys remember what is the softest mineral, which would be a 1? What's the softest mineral? Good, it's talc. Okay, and the hardest mineral, we talked about this, only it can cut itself, which would be diamond. Good, so Mohs hardness scale is another way to figure out the property, and that's just finding out the hardness of the rock, the mineral. Remember, every single rock is made of hundreds of different minerals. Okay. What else could we use to identify a rock? Think about it. Yes, remember I said if you smash a rock against the ground and it breaks into flat sheets, it's considered to have cleavage. Okay, so I'm going to write down that word. So far we have color, luster, streak, hardness, and cleavage. Cleavage is if you take that rock and you slam it against the ground and it goes into flat sheets. Okay, it's considered to have cleavage. We don't taste rocks, do we? No, that's not a way that we can find out the properties of rocks either. So I think that's pretty thorough, guys. These are different ways that we can use to identify and classify rocks, different properties of rocks that we can identify with our 5 senses. Okay. Now, let's talk about the 3 types of rocks and how they are formed. Because remember I told you that if you have that down, you literally have the rock cycle down. If you can think about, how the 3 types of rocks are formed. So we have, go ahead and write them down. I'm just going to write them down on my sheet. Maybe you could divide your paper into thirds again. So we have sedimentary, we have igneous, and we have metamorphic, okay? And if you're having trouble remembering how these are formed, think back to when we created the different food types from these rocks, okay? The sedimentary rock was when we took graham crackers and icing and layered. The igneous rock is when we took those messy chocolate chips and melted them and watched them harden. And the metamorphic rock is when we took the different colors of starburst and sat on them and squeezed them and stepped on them, and they became one ball with the colors kind of morphed together. Okay, so we need to talk about how these three rocks are formed. Okay, this is key, guys. So a sedimentary rock, what word is in sedimentary that we actually talked about when we talked about weathering and erosion? That would be sediment. Okay, sediment could be sand, little grains of sand, rocks, any of that type of stuff. Okay, so a sedimentary rock is simply formed how? How is a sedimentary rock formed? I want you to think about it. I want you to write it on your sheet when you think you have it. And I'm going to do the same thing. How is a sedimentary rock formed? Okay, guys, here's what I have. Check your work with mine. So, a sedimentary rock, the process has to start from weathering and erosion. Remember, weathering is a breaking down of rocks, and erosion is like the crab. When we played the crab game, you went from one side to the other. So, erosion is when it's carried somewhere. Those sediments compact and cement together into layers over hundreds of thousands of years. Okay, so these are the major characteristics of a sedimentary rock: weathering and erosion, and the sediments compact and cement together, like we talked about in class. These are all very important words that go along with sedimentary. Okay, now do the same thing for igneous. Okay, guys, here's what I have for igneous. An igneous rock is formed when lava and magma cools. It can either happen above ground or below ground. You can have those little magma pockets where the magma just cools, or the lava erupts from a volcano. Different rocks melt and it cools down. You have an igneous rock. And remember, we looked at a lot of different igneous rocks and they had a bunch of pores in them, all those holes, and that all depends on the cooling process as well as the crystallization during that time. And finally, metamorphic rock. Before you write down how that's formed, look in that word, like we've been practicing with in vocabulary, and you see the word morph. Okay, that means change. So how is a metamorphic rock formed? And maybe you want to write down where for this one. Okay, guys, so here's what I have. So a metamorphic rock morphs or changes through heat and pressure underground. It happens either in the crust or down in the mantle. Okay, it's whenever the rocks are under extreme heat and pressure that they're just compacted together and form a new rock. And think about your starburst for that form of rock. Okay, so the major thing that I want you to practice tonight, today, tomorrow, on Monday, before the test would be just explaining how you go from one rock to the next, which is essentially the rock cycle. Okay, if I said, how would a sedimentary rock transform into an igneous rock? You look at the characteristics, you think about the conditions under which it's formed. That's how it would go there. So how would an igneous rock form into a sedimentary rock? How would a sedimentary rock form to a metamorphic rock? So let's just practice one of those right now so you can get the idea if you're still a little confused. So how would a sedimentary rock form into a metamorphic rock? Well, we have a sedimentary rock that's all these layers, okay? It was formed over hundreds of years through compaction and cementation with all the sediments, Okay, after weathering and erosion kicked in and the sediments formed over time, it became a rock that's layered. So how does it become metamorphic? Well, it starts going underground. It might be in the crust, it might be down in the mantle. Over hundreds of years, extreme heat and pressure, and it forms into that new rock. So a sedimentary rock would form into a metamorphic rock through extreme heat and pressure underground. Okay, so maybe practice one right now. How would an igneous rock become a metamorphic rock? Okay, yeah. So you have that rock with all those pores, and it once again is under extreme heat and pressure underground, and it becomes a metamorphic rock. It just kind of mixes into this new type of rock. Okay, so practice going back and forth with each of those, which leads us into the rock cycle, because essentially that is the rock cycle. Okay, so tomorrow you might have to do some identifying with the rock cycle, but you also might have to do some explaining, guys. I might have an open-ended question that says, explain how this type of rock goes into this type of rock. Explain how this type of rock transforms into this type of rock. Okay, so you really need to know it up and down, back and forth, any way possible. Okay, so I would just take another sheet of paper, draw the rock cycle like we did during Jeopardy on Friday, and just put in all of the different characteristics. And actually, if you go to the Class Fusion page, there's a new link that says Rock Cycle Interactive. That's incredible because it gives you multiple choice questions. It goes through step by step, and it's just a really great tool that you can use at home. So I hope that you're able to get onto that or to Monday in class to help you practice with the rock cycle and the different ways that it forms. Okay, let me see if I have missed anything, guys, but I think that's pretty much it. The age of the Earth is, let's just review that, 4.6 billion years old. Scientists believe, based on evidence. Oh, one more thing. And that would be the scientific method. Okay, remember we wrote that in the back of your science notebook. Okay, so every scientist starts with a question, then they form a hypothesis, which is a guess, and then they perform their experiment, and after the experiment they write down their results and draw a conclusion. A conclusion is just simply based on factual evidence based on the hypothesis and what they actually saw. Okay, and one final thing with that, if you think about the puzzle that I had you put together in your scientific notebook, okay, this all goes in with the plates, but if you think of Pangaea, okay, that's the supercontinent, when all the continents were together as one. Alfred Wegener proposed that, okay, so he basically said all the continents used to be together as one, and I don't have my puzzle with me today, but imagine those are all the continents. How did he figure that out? There were really two things that he decided why that made sense. Number one would be the fact that the continents seem to go together like a puzzle. It's not perfect, but if you think about how South America fits right into Africa and etc., they really do form a supercontinent. And number two would be the fossil evidence. So imagine that these are my continents. This is obviously just a rough sketch, but he found an animal fossil here and an animal fossil here in two separate continents, the exact same animal fossil. Then he said the only way that could happen is simply by the fact that these used to be locked lands before they spread apart. Okay, because the continents are just sitting on those plates. And they also found that plant up in the Arctic that would not be able to survive there today. So they think the Arctic was actually further down south, and that plant was able to survive there. So that's the theory of Pangaea, and Alfred Wegener proposed that theory. Okay, so make sure you keep all of that straight in your mind as well. I'm going to toss you over really quick to me just showing you some stuff on the computer, guys, some links that I put on our Class Fusion page that would be excellent resources to work on to study, because remember I said this test is very challenging. You need to know everything inside and out and be able to explain it, okay? You know that Mr. Reichert is not the biggest fan of multiple choice, and since I made this test, I really did add a lot of open-ended and areas where you really just have to take the information and think about it, critically think about it, so that you have it down. And I almost forgot, oh my goodness, before I turn you away to the website, we forgot to talk about weathering and erosion. I don't know how I about forgot that. I know we brought it up really briefly, but weathering, erosion, and deposition. Okay, let me write down those words so you can see them. Think about the sugar cube and our crab soccer type game, okay, that we had the other day in class. So we have weathering, erosion, and deposition. And this is basically how sediments are formed. We made that foldable in class, and I think is really going to help you. So weathering is simply the breaking down of rocks. So we have a rock. How would a rock be weathered? Well, a couple of ways. Wind, rain, through human force, any of those types of things. So weathering, you're breaking down the rock. What did we do in class to break down a rock? Good, the sugar cube experiment. You put the sugar cube into the egg and we shook. Okay, until our arms could shake no more, and when we opened it up, we saw all of those little sediments that came out. The sugar cube was no longer that perfect cube. The edges were rounded. That's an example of erosion. Rain, wind, all of those things can do that. Okay. Now, erosion, you need to think of the crab soccer game that you guys played. When you took that piece of that rock, that was weathering, and went across the floor, that was erosion. Erosion is just the carrying of a sediment from one place to another. So erosion is just the carrying of a sediment from one place to another. Okay? That was the crab soccer game. How can erosion happen? Well, we went outside and looked at a couple of examples. Number one would just be by rain or wind. Okay, when it rains and you have those puddles that start going down a hill, they're carrying sediments with them. Or when it's windy, little sediments are picked up and carried to another place. Or over on the beach, all of that sand is sediment. That used to all be rock. That's from those waves crashing in time after time after time after time after time. And finally, deposition. Everybody say that word, deposition. If you look in that word, we talked about this, the word part, you would see deposit, the word deposit. Okay, that means to take something from one place and put it in another. Okay, so deposition is just when erosion happens, that's the placement of a sediment in another place. Okay, so when some sediment erodes from one place to another, deposition is taking place because it's being placed somewhere else. So let's just quickly think about a couple examples. You know, you guys, if you remember, I gave you that sheet where we practiced a bunch of different examples of erosion and deposition and weathering. Let me just give you a couple of really quick examples. If you think back to the waterfall, the water was coming over the waterfall and creating cracks on the wall of the waterfall. Well, those cracks create sediments. Those sediments wash away. Okay, they're eroded away, and they're deposited. Deposition takes place along the riverbank. Or the mountain ridge, think about the glacier that just went right through the mountain. Let me show you that example on here really quickly. If you think about the mountain ridge right here, the glacier came through it, that huge chunk of ice, and this is what you now have. You have a valley. Or if you think about the waterfall right here, the water came over, created cracks, and what happened is sediments were eroded away. Or if you think about the mountain, wind carried sand and different sediments and created a sand dune right here. Okay, that'd be another example of weathering, erosion, and deposition. They're all really tied together, guys. So you can look at the sheet I gave you, look at the foldable that we created, and also just think about the example we had in class. Weathering, when we shook that sugar cube and broke it apart in the egg. Erosion, when we played crab soccer across the classroom and carried a sediment from one place to another. And deposition, when you place that sediment on the other side of the classroom. So now, I know guys, this has been a big unit. I think now I have covered everything that is fair game tomorrow for your assessment. And I also wanted to say that I'm just going to turn you over, like I said a second ago, to the website so I can show you a couple of links that will be really great for you to use to study for your assessment over the next evening and tomorrow. Okay, so I hope you're able to look at this. If you bring in your materials that you use to study, you can get yourself 5 house points. So let's see who made it the whole way through the video. It's a long one today, guys, and got their house points. So I'm going to turn you over to the websites with me just talking. I'm really proud of you guys. Put in a ton of effort on this, and you're going to do really well. I believe in you. You just cannot give up on certain things when you come to them if they're really challenging. Put in all your effort, pull out all of your knowledge out of your mind, and just practice, because we talk about that all the time. That's how you become smarter, is through practice. Okay, so I'm going to turn you over to the website. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Study, study, study. 5 house points if you bring in every